For centuries, the fishermen down near the southern tip of India, they've whispered about the waters right off Rameswaram. They talk about this glitch in the natural world.
We usually expect ancient history to just be buried in the dirt, right? But tonight, we're looking at something that absolutely refuses to be buried. Something that is sitting right there on the surface of the dark waters, literally bridging the gap between an ancient epic and modern geology.
Welcome to the fog. Let's look at a memory that refuses to sink. Imagine standing by the dark, crashing waves of Rameswaram right after sunset. You bend down, you pick up a stone. It's heavy, it's solid. It feels like a dense piece of the earth.
And by every instinct, every basic law of physics we know, a rock of that density and size, when you drop it into the ocean, it should just plummet straight to the seabed. It should completely disappear into the dark.
But strangely enough, some of them don't. You drop it in, and the stone just bobs right back up to the surface. It just floats.
It's a really unsettling physical reality when you first witness it. You've got this heavy rock resting on the surface of the water, totally defying gravity. And if you ask the locals, well, they'll tell you exactly why that happens.
The answer they give you doesn't come from a geology textbook. It comes straight out of the Ramayana. This ancient text says that when Lord Rama was marching toward Lanka to rescue Sita, his army hit this impossible, massive obstacle, the churning ocean.
And they didn't have a fleet, There were no massive ships to carry an entire army across the sea. So the texts say the Vanara army just began to build a bridge.
A bridge made of stones that were specifically commanded not to sink. The legendary Ram Setu. They carried these massive glowing stones, laying them right onto the water, and formed this impossible pathway straight across the deep. It is so incredibly easy for modern society to just brush these stories off as pure folklore, just dust in the wind. But when you actually visit these regions, you realize really quickly that this isn't just a story told in the past tense.
Not at all. Even today, pilgrims walk these exact shores. Grandmothers still warn their children about the deep waters, and families will actually test these floating stones in small vessels.
For generations, this narrative has just been inherited. It's a living tradition. Because for millions of people, Ram Setu is not just mythology, it is memory. It's something they literally feel in their bones. And honestly, this is where the dynamic between myth and reality gets so intensely fascinating. Because if you step away from the shores for a second and look down from orbit, modern satellite imagery actually reveals something incredible.
Yeah, the maps showed this real, physical, chain-like structure just sleeping beneath the ocean. It looks like a faint skeletal spine connecting India directly to Sri Lanka.
Exactly where the ancient texts claimed the Vanara army laid down their floating stones, our most advanced eyes in the sky confirm that a shallow ridge actually exists there. The physical geography aligns eerily perfectly with the ancient poetry. Now, of course, modern science steps in here to anchor this. Geologists look at these floating stones and they immediately point to pumice. Pumice is a volcanic rock that cools so rapidly it actually traps tiny air pockets inside. It acts a lot like a natural sponge or foam, and that air makes it buoyant enough to float. But see, that explanation introduces this quiet little geological mystery of its own. Critics are quick to point out that pumice is actually highly uncommon in this specific coastal region.
Right, so if it is just pumice, how did such a massive concentration of these rare, floating stones end up perfectly arranged across the ocean floor right between these two landmasses? Science definitely has theories about shifting sandbars and ancient sea levels, but, that tension still remains.
And that tension, that's exactly what keeps people watching the waters. It really makes you wonder about the actual limits of our modern understanding.
Because we live in this era where we feel like we've categorized absolutely everything. We've mapped the human genome, we chart the depths of the Mariana Trench, we categorize the stars. But what happens when our most sophisticated mapping tools just run out of data?
What happens when the map ends? The scientific record goes totally quiet, and all that's left is the fog of ancient memory. Well, to really understand this blind spot, just look at how our greatest scientific institutions handled the unknown. When you navigate through NASA's massive digital archives, every now and then you'll search for a file that simply isn't there anymore.
And you don't just get a blank screen. You get this incredibly haunting message.
It says, the cosmic object you were looking for has disappeared beyond the event horizon. Even NASA, the agency literally mapping the infinite universe, has to admit that things slip away. Things vanish into the dark where our instruments simply cannot follow. And it is the exact same story down here on Earth. Take the United States Geological Survey, the agency responsible for mapping the very bones and stones of our planet. When their database fails to pull up a geological record, you receive a 404 error that simply reads, lost bison.
Lost bison. The cosmic object disappearing. These aren't just standard website errors. They're basically poetry. They're admissions that our databases actually have missing pages.
Exactly. Even the ultimate scientific authorities acknowledge that parts of our history, both terrestrial and cosmic, are just simply lost to the void. And that brings us right back to the dark waters of Rameswaram, because Ram Setu exists perfectly in that exact void. It is this incredible mystery caught right between two worlds.
On the one hand, you have the scientific record, and it really struggles to cleanly close the book on the origins of those floating stones or the precise history of that sunken chain. It just constantly hits these missing pages.
But then, on the other hand, we have an inherited memory, a living tradition that requires absolutely no satellite, no database, and no server to keep it alive. It has survived for centuries entirely on faith and storytelling. In a lot of ways, Ram Setu is a beautiful 404 error of modern history. It is this anomaly, caught perfectly between the earth and the sky.
It perfectly balances the geological theories of rare pumice stones with a deeply rooted, unshakable cultural faith.
It completely evades total scientific capture. And, perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Not every mystery needs to be sterilized and filed away in a database. Some mysteries are just meant to be felt. So we leave you tonight just looking out at those dark, moonlit waters between India and Sri Lanka, where fishermen still hold stones that simply refuse to sink, where the line between geological fact and ancient epic is just washed away by the tide. It leaves you with this lingering thought. If a legendary bridge of floating stones actually left a physical shadow on our modern satellite maps, what else is sleeping beneath the waters?